CSIRO has really had a long history of investment and interest in high-performance computing and computing in general. We're lucky enough that it actually goes all the way back to 1949 when Pawsey was first doing some research on the use of computers. Of course, we can sit here and look at those computers now and think, oh, well, they're only doing a few hundred calculations a second. But if we think about that compared to doing them by hand, then this was a transformational change. And I think this is probably one of the key things about supercomputing. As it continues to evolve, each step forward, even though it might seem like a relatively small step, each of those steps is really quite transformational. And when we start to look at it from a decadal perspective, we see something like, and we have seen over the past few decades, and I'm old enough to know this for a fact, that we've seen about a 1,000-fold increase in computing capacity every decade. I also know that this is very transformative in terms of what we can do. When we first started using computers running at the megaflop speed, we could do some very amazing things at the time, but they were quite simple compared to what we're able to do now. And as we go forward into the well and truly into the petaflop era and into the exascale era, then we've really completely transformed our capability to model and simulate systems, to take on things like machine learning. So I think machine learning is probably the most astounding thing that's emerged recently, and that's been driven by our ability for our computers to be able to train the networks in a reasonable amount of time. And you might think that, and the growth has been explosive. So what happened was the innovation cycle was shortened dramatically, and we were able to really move forward very quickly. And I think that's, again, this is one of the things that we see with our supercomputers, is once we start to apply them in particular areas where we haven't applied them, when we've scaled our codes up, we can start to be far more productive and innovative. So again, this is what we've seen in CSIRO. We've seen this countless times, or countless examples where we've applied high-performance computing to solve our science problems, to deliver impact from our science, to influence, to provide information for making policy decisions within Australia. All of the supercomputers are really driving that innovation, driving our ability to do that, so do all of those things. So I've shown this slide quite a few times, and I think it's still applicable, is that what we tend to see in high-performance computing, and certainly in computational sciences, it's really broken down into three areas. One is around science challenges. I think the interesting thing here is that high-performance computing was probably initially applied to defence-type problems. That's where we first applied it. But what we've seen happen is that it's really broadened dramatically over the years. We've gone from seeing high-performance computing as sort of something that's a specialist activity within universities and within major government research labs, to something that's now throughout industry. It's really becoming a critical technology to support industrial development around the world. Countless studies have demonstrated the productivity gains that you get from investing in high-performance computing. So I think that's all very well established. So it's really a clear strategic imperative to invest in high-performance computing to drive the economy forward. So while we started out very much in the engineering area and applying it broadly in science, big data has emerged in the last decade or so. We've seen this tremendous shift. As we've been able to collect vast amounts of data, so too we've been able to analyse them and start to extract the value from that big data. The example here for CSIRO, of course, and Western Australia was that the ASCAP project, the Australian Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder, and the future SKA project is probably cited as one of the major sort of big data challenges coming forward in science. There are many other international challenges, but we've got one right here in Australia, in Western Australia, and we have the Pawsey Centre built for that purpose, to support that activity going forward. So again, we can see a strong link between big data challenges and high-performance computing. The link is really quite obvious. And then finally, I think we're still in this day where parallel computing, the shift from multi-core, the last single-core processor was sold in 2005. That was the last time Intel sold us a single-core processor. The world's moved into multi-core, and I think we're all moving in that direction, but it's not a trivial thing, particularly for our scientists who aren't trained in computer science. Quite often this can be really a significant hurdle to being able to move forward. So again, in CSIRO, our response to that has been to build a team of computational scientists, to build our skill base, to be able to drive our science forward by partnering with the scientists to build highly scalable codes running on our high-performance computing facilities and delivering new science, innovative science, speeding up that process of innovation, allowing us to produce new science that can be published in the world's best journals. And that's certain, again, this isn't speculation, this is what we do, this is how we do it in CSIRO. So we've also seen some tremendous growth. I spent a number of years as CSIRO's e-research director. The primary focus there was very much on how do we improve and enhance our ability to work with data. We made numerous investments to support research, but one of the key things was that we took a very holistic approach to the science workflow. We built tools and technologies to support it, and we built wrapped services around all of those tools and technologies. So simply providing the tools and technologies wasn't sufficient. You really need to build a team. And I think now the IM&C scientific computing team is roughly order about 100, 120 staff within CSIRO. So you need that substantial team really to support the use of these technologies and to gain the maximum benefit from them. And again, we've seen tremendous benefits accrued to those investments. So again, this slide's probably getting a little old, but I think the vast majority of our scientists now are using our scientific computing facilities. But by that I mean they've really moved off, say, doing everything on a desktop. So, and we're applying it really across all areas of CSIRO. Again, all areas of our business are benefiting from and using high-performance computing. CSIRO is probably the major sort of user of high-performance computing, also one of the major investors. So we have heavy involvement in the NCI facility, in the Pawsey Centre. We're major players, plus we invest in our own high-performance computing systems, which we operate within CSIRO as well. And then we've used it for really a massive range of applications across all areas of science. So high-performance computing has really emerged as an essential tool for CSIRO science. This just gives you an example of how we do it. So CSIRO is really quite famous for its ability to build large multidisciplinary teams and apply them to sort of complex problems. This is an example of how we might screen materials for particular desirable properties that we might want from our materials. And we can actually start out with a very large number of materials. In this example, if you see the fine print up there, it says candidate materials, and underneath that it says 1 billion structures. And then we have a whole set of screening tools, which is great. And then underneath that, there's another little bit of text there that says high-performance computing. And really, that's the essential ingredient there. No high-performance computing, very hard to screen billions of materials. And again, it accelerates it. And then from running our screening tools, we end up with a set of promising materials, which we might then go out to a research laboratory, into a lab, and actually make them and start to test the ones that we want. But if we try and do that starting with 1 billion materials, we've really got no hope. If we just go into the lab, we'll burn through a lot of PhDs trying to find that material and still probably won't find it. So HPC is the essential ingredient. And as you can see down the bottom here, it's a list of skills that we bring to bear to solve some of these problems. So again, that just gives you a sense of how we operate, how HPC plays a role in the work that we do. So top 500, I think probably everyone's probably familiar with this, so I'm not going to go on too long, just to say that within CSIRO we've got a similar sort of graph. We can look at our performance, and it's sort of mirroring that sort of steady development that we've seen, or that exponential development. It looks steady on a linear, it looks linear on an exponential scale there. So we've been seeing that sort of, our growth has been mirroring it, and there's a picture there of Bracewell. That's our latest addition in CSIRO to our computing platforms. Again, this is an old graph, but I like to use it because it really just shows how much of a transformation's happened in CSIRO over the past decade or so. So our e-research program really kicked off around 2007, 2008, really started up in earnest around 2010, ran for about 4 or 5 years after that point in time. But what we've seen is, and this is just showing HPC usage, scientific computing usage, so we ask people to obtain a separate account so we can actually tell who's using it and who's not. And Rob Bell can probably provide an update on this if he's got one, I'm not sure. but he's here today. But the key thing here is that high-performance computing, the use of scientific computing is really has gone right through the organisation. I'd say just about every one of our scientists now is really using high-performance computing or scientific computing facilities to support their research. Very few are doing it solely at the desktop. We also know we've got 2,500 registered users on our cloud infrastructure as well. And so, the organisation has really transformed over the past decade or so. What I wanted to mention was that not only do we deliver the equipment, provide that equipment that's growing in performance all the time, but we provide a series of support activities for our researchers, and they cover things like computing, accelerated computing, data, managing complex data, sustaining the software that you might develop, visualising the outputs of your work, building workflows so you can be more efficient, more easy to transfer your work, more reproducible. And that basically funds IM&T staff within CSIRO to work on a project part-time, and we have a biannual process. And there's been significant uptake. Again, I'm not quite sure what's happened in the last couple of years, but I think it's a fairly similar picture. We're now up to running about 80 or 90 of these projects every 6 months working with our researchers. So the cumulative effect of this is quite significant in terms of transforming and getting our users to use our facilities. That creates significant increased demand for the facilities as well. So something that's hard to keep up with. So while we invest heavily in the NCI facility and also in the Pawsey Centre, primarily CPU-based computational facilities, we also have some more innovative activities as well. So I was leading the computational and simulation sciences activity within CSIRO, and back in 2009 we could see GPU computing as sort of emerging as a potential new platform for supporting computational science. And so we were in a position through that transformational capability platform to build one of the first GPU clusters, certainly the first in Australia and one of the first in the world. There was only really a handful at the time when we built our first GPU cluster and started using it. We applied it, we sort of applied it to areas where we knew we were going to get benefit. Image analysis and imaging type tasks were a major activity within CSIRO, so we were able to apply this GPU cluster to those types of activities quite successfully. This just gives you a little bit of a history, and it's been that Bragg supercomputer that we built has been on the top 500 list for many years, for most of its lifetime. Eventually it got to end of life and we replaced it, but most of its lifetime it was sitting on the top 500 list. This gives you an idea of how it's evolved. The last graph on the end here, it's not quite accurate. I haven't put the latest numbers in, but this graph here shows what's happened with the P100s and our new Bracewell supercomputer that's just been released. As I said, these numbers aren't accurate. The numbers probably should be a lot higher than this. But I think the key message here is just how far the GPU computing is able to deliver floating point operations to science problems. And we're quite happily using that to support a whole range of tasks. This was a quick snapshot of what was happening on Bragg a while ago. We had about 50 users running GPU-based jobs, doing GPU-based projects. We ran about 30,000 GPU jobs run that month, and just gives you a picture of the sorts of activities we were using them for. Machine learning obviously has emerged as sort of the killer application for GPUs, and so we're seeing dramatic growth in the use of GPUs for machine learning type applications. And within CSIRO we're getting a dramatic interest in the use of machine learning amongst our scientists. I think there was a recent workshop at the C3 DISC conference in Melbourne. I think that was packed to the rafters with people interested in machine learning. Just to give you an idea, one of the reasons for using GPUs, of course, is that they're very energy efficient and they can deliver similar sorts of computing capacity as some of these major facilities. One thing we need to do, and it's become quite urgent, is we really need to refresh some of our national facilities, like our NCI facility. And one of the reasons why you can really see that we need to do that is that 32 nodes of something like a DGX1 can deliver 1 petaflop. on LIMPAC, and that's equivalent to 3,500 compute nodes or 112x fewer nodes in order to deliver the same capacity. You can't necessarily extract that for every application, but I think it does point to the potential for GPU computing to be playing a more significant role. Certainly where it's appropriate, you should be considering it. But also I think this also makes it very, very clear that that the NCI facility, we still need our big CPU machines in order to be able to drive our science forward, because there are many applications that will still require and will require CPUs going forward. So we really need to refresh this facility. This is also showing that very clearly, because the NCI facility, or that the region, the original region, was at least 4 years old at that point. So that's the GPU cluster, Bracewell. Looks pretty good. So it's loaded full of P100s. There's the new V100's just been released, so that's on the market now. So you'd see a step up in performance over the results shown here. If you went with the latest V100, I think it's another sort of 40 or 50% boost in performance over what you're seeing with the Pascal capability. So this is online and operational and running. I've done some runs on it. It's very impressive. There's still more work to do. We're going to be upgrading the interconnect on it, so Gilad might be quite pleased to hear about that. So I'll just talk a little bit about the computational platforms group that I lead in CSIRO. We're working in sort of 4 areas, have strong sort of industry and science focus in quantitative imaging and remote sensing and image integration. So that team is led by Peter Cacetta, is based here in Western Australia at our CSIRO offices. And our statistical computing and data modelling group, led by Chansey Shao, again also based in WA. Our life sciences, informatics and biovisualisation team based in Sydney, and our molecular materials modelling team, which is based in Melbourne. So that team, the molecular materials modelling team, is led by Amanda Barnard. She's one of the biggest users of high-performance computing in Australia because of her work at the quantum materials research. So this just gives you an overview of the remote sensing and image integration team. One of the key points to note there is they're really working with many external collaborators, including Australian government agencies and foreign government agencies, particularly for their work on carbon and carbon monitoring, and they've won awards for that work. So they have a broad range of themes that they're working on. They're working with vast amounts of data collected remotely. And then they apply statistical techniques to extract key information that's sort of relevant to policy issues. So one of the key areas that they're working on at the moment is a thing called Urban Monitor, and it allows them to monitor urban environments on a regular basis and provide that information, particularly to local governments and state governments, to assist them in managing at the local government and state levels. And also, as I mentioned earlier, they're also contributing to our understanding of carbon in the environment. And as I mentioned, for some of their work, they've won some major awards in the past for their work. So they're based here in WA, and so if you want to talk to them, let me know. Our quantitative imaging and visualisation team, again, they've been working hard. This is primarily analysing and breaking down images. They've developed high throughput methodologies. They've developed a tool called HCA Vision. This is being used by major corporations, particularly PerkinElmer and others. They've been working closely with the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and you might have heard of, they hit the press recently with some of their work on this 3D angiogenesis and for early diagnosis of tumours. So that's recently attracted a lot of interest. And they've been developing a broad range of tools, including, the example here is auto density, which has attracted a lot of interest and won a New South Wales I award for that work as well. So they're also working in future cities. They've been working with SkyCam to develop a better understanding of the impact of clouds on energy production, solar energy production. They've been working on the Urban Living Lab project to support some of the work on developing new urban platforms for innovation and research, working on in the area of security and safety, particularly in the areas of biosecurity, and some major new emerging platforms, precision agriculture. So this is working with our agriculture business unit. They're focusing on viticulture initially, but these techniques are really broadly applicable, and we expect to see these sorts of tools become the standard tools for managing many of our crops in Australia. Been developing tools in virtual to allow us to take good use of virtual reality. There were some great videos of our national insect collection, examples from our national insect collection down in the middle there. Quite impressive to actually see in virtual reality. So we can see VR being really applied to our assets that aren't currently digitised. So one of the things we'd like to do is take our national collections, digitise them and make them available in 3D and VR and AR. And so that really unlocks the value of them. At the moment they're really stuck in cabinets in our labs, and they're not really out there and available for researchers to easily use. And if they want to see one, they have to request it, and it has to be sent to them, and then they can have a look at it, and then they send it back. If we're lucky, we get it back. Sometimes we don't get them back. Sometimes customs seizes them and destroys them. So all sorts of bad things can happen with physical items versus the digital. So anyway, so some great projects there. The materials, the molecular and materials modelling group, as I mentioned, led by Amanda Barnard, they've been doing enormously successful research in this area, and they've been developing some major new platforms. Cloud Mole, that's being developed and will be released to the scientific community for use in understanding, helping with the selection of materials. And Hunt and Gather is also being used to work with the big data sets. So they're also, through these simulations, are able to generate enormous data sets of potential candidate materials. And once you've got that enormous data set, you have to be able to sift through it. So they're also building tools not only to generate the data using the supercomputers, but then also developing the tools to sift through the data once they've generated it. And some examples of the software that they've developed: SNAP, the nanoparticle assembly code, and also the quantum Monte Carlo techniques, the CMQMC, are some of the software products that they're generating and making available on the supercomputers. They all rely on our high-performance computing facilities to be able to run efficiently. So just highlighting those. And we're also developing many more results as well. So this is a slide from 2016 showing some of the work that that particular team has generated. As I mentioned, they're a highly successful team and publishing in world-leading journals and attracting huge impact from those publications. And Amanda Barnard, I think, 2015. Won a sort of a major award, and so I think she's becoming recognised as one of our leading scientists in Australia. We also have a statistical computing and data modelling group. They're based here in Western Australia. Again, what we're seeing is statistics. Typically, this was very PC based. What we're seeing here is, I'd regard this as really a computational statistics group led by Chansey Shao. They're really applying high-performance computing to help solve many of the problems that they're looking at. They're doing things like looking at extremes, particularly the extreme modelling work, because their statisticians are applying it to things like weather and climate. So that's an obvious one, but they're also applying it to the stock market and to other areas where there's a significant interest in extremes and the impact that extremes have on the economy. They're also doing a broad range of applying their tools and techniques to a broad range of problems and developing statistical computing and software as well. So again, if you're interested, this team's based here in WA. If anyone's based in WA, then please come and see me and I can introduce you to them. So here's some examples of some of the projects that they're running. One of the key ones that they've had really significant impact on our policy in Australia is their development of the DATA project and the statistical downscaling techniques. that they developed. So these were really essential to the success of that particular project. So that gives you, this also gives you a flavour of how high-performance computing, how we use it to drive our science, and how then that science drives impact and policy. So this is an example of how we do that. So biovisualisation, the BioVis team doing a fantastic job of building and delivering tools. The slide in the middle shows the Aquaria tool that's available online. Sorry about the quality of the projection, but it's online. It's quite a beautiful tool for studying the information you need around molecular structure of a particular sequence. And they've loaded tens of thousands of structures onto the website, which researchers can then use. And they're getting tens of thousands of users coming on and using these tools and technologies that they're developing. They also do an enormous amount of work on visualization, how you actually visualize data. They've also developed a whole range of world-class animations, which I'm not going to show you today, but they've developed some really fantastic animations. If you want to, they put an enormous amount of effort. This isn't just visualization, it's scientific visualization. They put an enormous effort into making it scientifically realistic. They do the research, so this visualization isn't a cartoon. This represents our best understanding of the science at the time that they created these visualizations. So it's a big difference from just a pure visualization. So, in summary, just our computational platforms group, we're building high-value computational tools, scalable services, global-scale platforms for application across industry, the innovation system and the community. We're working in those areas. That's the areas that we're working in. We're happy to work with you. If you're interested in working with us, let us know. Please come and see me. Again, sort of our path to impact, just to emphasise some of the things that we're working on. DATA61, we're certainly interested in areas like future cities, health outcomes, security and safety, precision agriculture and spatial intelligence. You can see how the work that we're doing plays into those areas. And we're also seeking to use sort of global platform economics to help us deliver global scale impact. So we want to be able to develop our tools and get them out there to industry, to the research community, and get them used and being generating revenue in return, so that we can continue to develop these capabilities and develop and deliver them to the research community. So I think some conclusions. I think you can see that we have a strong science impact focus and strategic vision for both within CSIRO, within our e-research component that lives within IM&T, and within our research areas across the board. We have really a comprehensive set of e-research services, and within that I include our high-performance computing capabilities. So it allows us to address the entire science workflow. We have really national and an international reach and global connections. CSIRO is very highly connected globally, as you'd expect, and we're opening up even more connections by opening a series of offices, both in the United States, I think also in China and other parts of the world. So we're starting to expand our connections and to give them form within these countries. We have world-class high-performance computing capabilities, which we're continuing to develop, notwithstanding the fact that we really do need to upgrade our major facilities, Pawsey and NCI, and that we're seeing thousands of our staff are now moving into this sort of modern e-research high-performance computing world. So with that, I'll take questions.